Feeling a little zoomed out? Want to make your meetings more professional and engaging? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we feature difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. Thank you for listening. I'm Nicole Jansen, your host, and our guest today is public speaking and interpersonal communication expert Lauren Sergy. She is going to explain how to make the most of our virtual meetings every time. And the funny thing is we've been having some technical difficulties, of course, because we're going to be talking about the effectiveness of virtual meetings and doing them well. So anyway, we're going to have a great conversation here. We're excited that you're here tuning in. If you have questions and you have comments and you want to chime in here, please do. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll address your questions and comments as we go along. Little shout out to Andrew Gottlieb, who recommended Lauren as a guest. I always like to acknowledge those who are supporting our show, and we appreciate Andrew for making the wonderful connection to another fellow Canadian, which I'm a Canadian. I live down in the US, but I'm a Canadian. And so thank you, Andrew. One more thing before we dive in is this podcast is actually brought to you by my training and coaching company, which is Discover the Edge and Leaders of Transformation. And if you are a leader who wants to do better, be better, make a greater impact in the world, book a free consult with me to discuss your goals, your opportunities, and as we go into this new year, maybe the breakthrough that you're looking to have in 2022. And so you can go to the leadersoftransformation.com website, and you can click on coaching there. And there's a scheduling link, and you can book a free consult with me. So all that being said, let's bring our guest on. Lauren, welcome to Leaders Transformation. We're glad to have you here today.
I'm very happy to be here, Nicole. Now that we've got it sorted, we've got
Absolutely.
It all solved.
I mean, it was so crazy. So for those, let's just start there, because I think that's like the elephant in the room.
It's a perfect place to start.
It's a perfect place to start, given our topic, is that, sometimes things don't work the way they're supposed to. How many of you ever had that experience where your virtual meeting, the technology didn't work, people couldn't figure out how to make it work? Well, we had that this morning where the link to log in didn't work for Lauren, and it's like, I've been doing this how many times, and it just didn't work, and so we had to keep trying different things and so forth. And so the moral of the story is sometimes you got to roll with it. And so that's what we did this morning. And here we are. So yay. So Lauren, tell us a little bit about, you've got a new book out there called Unmute, which I just loved, by the way. It was fun. It was, it was really informative. But it was also a lot of fun, the way that you were talking about virtual meetings and some of the humor, because you got to laugh about it. Just like this morning, we got to laugh about what's going on, because if you don't laugh about it, you get very uptight and tense, and then that doesn't help make your meetings fun for others either. So tell us a little bit about this book and your journey, and why you kind of got into diving into this particular topic.
Well, I've been using virtual for a very long time. It has always been a cornerstone of my own business. It's why I've been able to connect with so many people. So when the pandemic hit, my first thought was, now you all have to do it. And then my second thought was, oh no, now they all have to do it. Because many of my clients I knew would have a real struggle with flipping over to virtual. They're very, very set. In person is the only way to go. People cannot work remotely. And aside from any personal hangups they had about remote work and virtual connection, there were very real security issues within their organizations. I work with a lot of financial firms, banking, insurance, that sort of thing. So to hook in virtual meetings for them and to have that technological intermediary really did mean that they needed to make some serious policy decisions and be very responsive to security needs. So I knew there was going to be mass chaos. And what I did was I reached out, because of course all of my in-person events got canceled March of 2020, like everyone else. And I started calling up my clients and saying, how are you managing with virtual? And it turned from, I think it'll be okay, to, I am losing my mind, to, can you please help me? So it's not an intuitive way of communicating. And I just started doing webinar after webinar after webinar, helping my clients and their teams get a little more comfortable in this environment. And very rapidly, it became evident that this is not going away. The genie is out of the bottle. And even once the pandemic has passed us, she will not be stuffed back in. So virtual is now mainstream. And I thought, there's no really good books out there on it. So I wrote one. I can't help everyone, but I can write a book. And
Well,
yeah.
it is an excellent, excellent book. I would highly encourage everyone to get a copy of this book, How to Master Virtual Meetings and Reclaim Your Sanity, which
That's the big thing.
which is great as well. When you talk about in that book, you talk about some of the let's just have some fun. Talk about some of the funny things that you've had because you've been working with your clients. Some of the funny things that have happened. People not wearing their pants and all sorts of. So tell us some good stories to make so people who are listening who are going, oh my gosh, that happened to me, or I've seen that. Don't feel like they're the only one that this has happened to.
So one of my favorite personal stories is that I was teaching a class for the University of Alberta online. It was supposed to be in person, evening professional development course sort of thing. And my husband was getting the kids to bed because this class was being held at night. So I'm teaching away to however many students were on the camera. And normally I double lock the doors to my basement because I'm paranoid. And I have two little jailbreakers in this house that can Houdini their way into anything. I thought I had locked both doors, and then the door to my office slowly starts to swing open. And just right out of the corner of my eye, I can see my son, who was 8 at the time and knows better, creep in. So this is wickedly distracting, but I have my game face on. I am carrying on like nothing's happening. And he army crawls across the room like that would make it better, moves behind the table where I cast from, and then slowly starts to rise up on the other side of my monitor, mouthing silently. Like, finally, I just had to stop. I'm sorry, everyone. My son's in the room. What do you want? Get out!
I love you. Not
And
right
I
now.
love you. Get out. And the students, I mean, most of them are my age. They are just killing themselves laughing. So that was fairly harmless. People fully expect that. But my favorite stories that did not happen on my end are, for one, the Canadian member of parliament who has shown up pantsless on camera not once, but twice. The first
Wow.
time my thought was, you know what? People are making this mistake. They forget that it's on. Boo to the person who released these photos. That is uncalled for. The second time he did it, it's like, okay, buddy. No, you had your one time of forgiveness. Now you are seeing what you can get away with. And then there was the scandal over the Christmas holidays last year of various Canadian, mostly MLAs, so that's our provincial politicians, hiving off to tropical locations when everyone else was under lockdown. Not exactly a good look, and they knew it wasn't a good look because many of them were carrying on with their virtual meetings using virtual backgrounds to hide the fact that they were in the most famous case off in St. Bart's. He had a nice big picture of Queen's Park, Toronto behind him. That's not where he was, and everyone knew it. So those are the instances where I just go, oh man, come on.
Yeah, surely you could have if you're going to do that, just don't book any meetings,
Just don't book any
But
meetings.
yeah.
Don't try to hide it. It's very obvious that that is not a crackling fireplace where you actually are right now.
True. Oh yeah, I heard about that because people were not impressed because here they are told that they can't meet with their
Yep.
families and all of this, and they have to stay in their homes because it's unsafe to go out. And it's like, oh, okay.
And there
So
are our elected officials
yes,
saying stay at home, but then hiving off and trying to hide it using virtual meeting technology.
yeah.
It's like,
Well, we won't get into the whole leadership thing because we can talk.
yeah.
I talk about that on other, episodes and so forth because that's a whole rabbit hole that we can go down there. But coming back to this whole idea of, of doing our meetings well. So, what are some of the things that we can do, and maybe some of the common things that you've seen people do poorly that you've now helped them to do better? Because you kind of think that, you know this is the same as as in person. It's just on a screen, but it's
Hmm.
not. There's a lot of distinctions, and people have a hard time making the distinctions when they're trying to figure out like cameras and lighting and all sorts of, and those virtual backgrounds, which I
Virtual
am
backgrounds.
not a fan of
No.
virtual backgrounds.
I think I go on a 3-page rant in the book at one point on virtual backgrounds. What people don't realize is that communication overall is a very complicated process, and it is a contextual process. So anytime we're speaking with one another, our environment plays into the way that we communicate. The reasons why we're meeting plays into the way that we communicate, and how we interact with each other has very, very strong effects on the way that we understand one another. And what virtual does is it really messes around with that context aspect. If we were in person, we could make direct eye contact. That is massive. And people don't realize how important it is. But when we're in person, we can make that direct eye contact. It is impossible unless you have a camera where the lens is embedded behind the screen that you are actually using. Unless you have a monitor, a camera set up like that, it's impossible for the person on the other side of the camera to say, oh, she's looking directly at me, and you actually to be looking directly at them. So I'm close. My camera right now is set up square in front of my screen. If I were to look at you, I'm over here. Now I can see Nicole. But if I want you to feel like I am looking at you, I have to look at the camera. And that feeling of direct connection is really important. We can overcome it. We can say, oh, I know that they have to look at the camera. I know that they're not looking right at me. But when you're speaking to one another, it's very primitive areas of our brain that are interpreting all this information. And that primitive area acts faster, it thinks faster than the logical part in the front of our head. It's a totally different context. So that messes people up. And you have to remember too, people will say, oh, well, the conversations don't flow as well. And that's because normal conversational cues cannot work on camera. If you're in a group meeting, how do you normally know whose turn it is to speak? You look at the
Well,
person,
yeah,
you gesture to them, you
yeah.
orient your body towards whose ever turn it is. And of course, I am assuming that this is for people who have normal sight, for sighted individuals. We physically indicate who it is we want to speak to. We can't do that on virtual. So the fabric, the way that our conversations flow, falls apart. And then, of course, you're dealing with things like environmental distractions, the kids busting into the room, the coworkers walking around behind your camera, whatever it might be. All of that really pulls at our brain, which means that this is an exhausting method of communication. And we think it should be just like in person. It's not. Yes, you are legitimately more tired after engaging this way than you are after a normal meeting. So the common mistakes is losing the physical indications, losing the eye contact, losing the gesture, um, not having a way of verbally cueing people as to when it's their turn to speak. Really important that you verbally cue people. And then simply oversaturating yourself with too many virtual meetings too often. Too many throughout the day, too many throughout the week, not taking into account the mental fatigue that occurs.
So I want to do a little shout out to Oscar Rodriguez, who's been reaching out, commenting. Hi, Oscar. Thank you for tuning in. And it sounds like he's getting some great value in this already. So let's dive in. It's interesting you talk about the camera view, because I was saying as I logged into Restream and I was setting it the way that I normally set it, and they
Mhm.
made some upgrades, and so now it's different. And so I'm trying to look at you, and I'm looking at the chat, and I'm looking at the captions and all of
Yep.
this stuff, and it's tough to do that, and especially when I notice I have a lot of clients of mine who are financial advisors, and they have multiple screens. I have some that have like
Yes.
several, not just one screen, but several screens open, and they've got things that they're looking at. And I know you talk in the book about just telling people what you're actually doing, so they don't think that you're actually multitasking. And I'll do that, because
Yep.
when I'm on the phone, or I should say on Zoom with somebody, and let's say where I'm making notes, and I might be making notes on my computer, I will say I'm making notes on what we're talking about, so that they don't think that I'm multitasking, because multitasking is a really big problem. And I know even people, so maybe you can talk about that in terms of multitasking. How do you prevent multitasking or deal with it? And the other thing that comes up, I notice, is people off, like they'll turn off their video,
Oh.
and because they can just do whatever it is and nobody really knows. How do you, as a leader, how do you prevent that from happening? And at the same time, though, on the flip side, and not have people on video that have like cameras moving all over the place because they're on their phone,
Mhm.
and you're seeing them walk down the hallway or something like that. How do you deal with some of these dynamics?
We'll start with the second question first because it is a good one. Anyone who is calling a meeting should set the expectations for how people are supposed to turn up. This is not something we ever had to deal with in person. You turned up to a meeting, everyone is in the same setting, you all have the same background, no one's moving around, they're dressed more or less the same. You didn't need to think about the expectations of how to be with other people. But now we have choices. Now we have to make these decisions. And it's one more thing to think about. When people are tired, they start to make poor decisions. Oh, I won't wear the pants. Oh, I can do this while I'm making a sandwich, whatever it might be. The biggest expectation to set is cameras on or cameras off. Let people know this is a cameras on meeting. Please ensure that your camera is connected. If it is not, you will be reminded to turn it on. It does not take many reminders, especially if it's been set in advance, for people to start following suit. Because what you're saying is this is how we are all expected to turn up, to show up together for each other. By the same token, acknowledging that this is a tiring mode of communication and many people are not comfortable with it and are not about to get comfortable with it. It's not a personal failing. It's just they're awkward in front of the camera. Set some meetings as cameras off. Give people a break. Some companies I've worked with have set up entire days as camera. It's the new casual Friday, cameras off Fridays. You can book as many meetings as you want, but they're voice only. Wear those PJs, no problem. And that works really well. It gives people the reprieve. So if it's a team that you know well and they've seen you at your worst and all of that, you can let them know, let's just do this as cameras off. We're all going to be looking at the spreadsheet anyway. So this can be a cameras off meeting. Otherwise, if there's a lot of discussion going to be going on, you want people to connect, tell them cameras on. If someone continues to refuse to do it, there might need to be performance consequences. And I say that because again, this isn't the little deal that we think it is. When one person is consistently not showing up by turning their camera on, what they're communicating to other people is, I am not willing to put in the same kind of effort to be in this space with you the way you are with me. And that is what actually can start a lot of team tension. When people moved to virtual, that was something I noticed. They were getting angry at people that normally they get along with really well. Very often, not all the time, but very often it was people's willingness to turn on their camera. I cleaned up. I put on makeup. I shaved, whatever. Why can't they do that for me? And it's this little script that runs through in the back of your mind and just kind of eats at you. So setting up camera etiquette actually helps a team work better together. It is a form of etiquette, it's courtesy. And that really does matter. You can remind people too, please don't be making a sandwich and trying to do housework and walking around. If you need to move and you've got your camera on, turn the camera off, move, come back, then turn it back on, right? We can flex with that. And of course, be flexible if people need to be at home with the kids. Sorry, the camera has to be off. The baby's sick and I can't put them down, but I still need to be here for this meeting. They can have their camera off, bring the humanity into it. But really setting the expectation is quite important. Some organizations also establish a very specific dress code. No hoodies, no ball caps. That was a problem with many of my clients. Just showing up to a meeting with the CEO in a hoodie and a ball cap. It's not appropriate. Not at the office, not here. But that needs to be communicated so that they don't have to make the decision. The first question was, oh shoot, I went off on a rant like that. What was the first question, Nicole?
I'm
It was a
trying to
good or
remember.
two. Maybe it'll come to us.
It'll come back. It'll come back.
It'll come back.
Well, one of the things,
Distractions and multi-screening. See?
there you go.
Distractions and multi-screens. Okay,
Yes.
how many screens do you have in front of you right now?
Me, I have one.
You are a unicorn. You are a rare unicorn at this point. I have two. That's my typical setup. Many people, like you said, some of your clients, they are set up like the Starship Enterprise. Screens everywhere. And you gave the best example of what you can do in these situations is if you need to orient, like physically orient to a different screen to do a thing, tell people what you're doing. It's not that you don't have, the problem isn't that you don't have something else on the screen that's closest to your camera. If you need to be interacting with a spreadsheet for the majority of your meeting, put that spreadsheet on the screen under your camera so that you can easily look at it and then look back up and look at it and do that kind of dance so that you can easily do that. But if you need to, the problem becomes the reorientation where you have physically turned away from the person. That's what our brains respond badly to. She's turned away. In a meeting, it's not a problem because we can see what you're doing when we're in person. Virtual, we can't see. So what's going on there? Is she reading email? Is she doing something else? That chatter starts up in the back of your mind. So you tell them what it is you're looking at. Oh, you know what? I think that I have that item in an email over here. Let me call it up. You go, you do your thing. Okay, here's what that email says. Reorient to the camera and talk to them directly again. Aside from that, putting the active screen behind your camera or underneath your camera, that is a very good solution to not reorienting. And then turn off as many screens as you can. You probably do not need to have 5 different applications open. Depending on your job, one of my friends does software launches. He needs 5 screens and all the applications open when they're going live. But for many people, particularly people in leadership positions, they don't need to. So turn everything else off. That way you can focus on the task at hand. These devices were meant to encourage us to multitask. Remember that. They want to pull us in all directions. So you have to help your brain overcome that by turning them off.
Well, you bring up a really good point, which you asked me about how many screens I have. So I only have the one because of the focus, because a lot of what I do is if I'm coaching, I don't want to have a lot of things. And even I think it was in your book that talked about the tabs. How many tabs did you have open? And people have all these tabs. That was making me crazy because every time I would open up my browser, I would have, so I do close my browser when I'm not using it, where I know a lot of people will leave it open, but that's just like squirrel, opportunities there. And so then I had it open where it would have all of these preloaded tabs, set. And what I found was I would go on my browser to look for something, and I see Facebook and I'm like, well, just check Facebook. Let's check this and that. And I'm like, why am I here? It's kind of like I went into the kitchen and I can't remember why type of thing that would happen. And so I just said, forget it. I just took all of those off, put them as bookmarks. So they show up under the tab, but they're not showing up as actual tabs. They're like kind of on a bar there. And so just little things, tips and tricks for me that have worked to keep me from being distracted, and I can stay 100% focused with what it is that I'm doing. And it's funny, those little things make a big difference because
They
I've
do.
noticed I don't go all off into different directions and say, oh, let's check that. Let's just see what that message is, because it's like blinging in my face and saying, you have X number of notifications. Oh my God, I have 100 notifications. Why do I have, and then I'm like, let me take care of that. And that's not really what is the best use of my time right now. So
You're right. And those technologies are designed to do this. It is part of the business model. I don't fault the companies for having this as part of their business model. It works. It gets us to look with them and engage with them and become dependent on the different things. But it's not good for us when we're working to have all of this stuff going on. And that it appeals to primitive areas of our brain that is really hard to consciously turn off. So when those alerts are coming up, it's a whole bunch of open mental loops, and your brain wants to close them, close them, close them, close them. And you can't actively be making that decision while you're also having a conversation. I will ignore that thing and continue speaking to you oh so clearly. It's really hard. So you have to shut them down. One of my favorite ways of doing this, because squirrel, 100%, I will squirrel with this stuff, is the browser extension strict workflow, which is, it's the Pomodoro technique. So the whole tomato timer thing where you have however many minutes of active work and then a few minutes off. I use it to block websites when I am in meetings or if I'm trying to do focus work. And as soon as that thing gets clicked, I know that the websites that I have listed in the blocker won't come up, even if they're open in the tab. If I open the tab, it blocks them. And so having a million tabs open is bad. Yes, it really, really is. But even if some of them I do inadvertently keep open, I won't be able to check them. And the thought of checking them doesn't even cross my mind. It's like, I know I can't, so I don't. And it makes it that much easier.
Yeah, it's really about knowing yourself and protecting yourself from yourself is what I'm hearing. And so
Yeah,
that you can actually, and you're a communication expert, it's so that you can communicate with others in the best possible way. Communication is the response we get. So if people aren't feeling connected, then it's on us. Like, why are they not feeling connected rather than saying,
yeah,
what's wrong with them? And they can't figure out how to do this. They can't, you got to adjust to the new world, a new way of doing things. Well, yes and no, there is an adjustment process that's needed, but the onus is on us as a leader. If I'm the one who desires to have good communication, then it's up to me to make it work. So,
absolutely. You're the only person who can. You
yeah,
can't will them. You can't will the other person or
yeah,
even scold the other person into making these changes, but you can make them on your end. Take as much responsibility as you can. I always say everything I do on camera is for the comfort of the person on the other side of the camera. I'm not doing this for me,
yeah.
but it's everything I can do for them to make their experience better. And it comes back to me because they have a good experience, the communication flows better, it's a positive thing, and we carry on.
Yeah.
So it's worth making the adjustments. It's worth fiddling with whatever it is you have to fiddle with to get yourself set up properly in order to do this. And just remember, even speaking via video conference requires your brain to be actively juggling more things at once because, oh, looking at the camera and trying to get the documents and all of this stuff that's going on, your brain is working harder in this medium. So make it as easy as possible for it to work with this medium. Don't fight the medium. Make it easy for yourself to work within it.
So that brings up two questions, and I'm going to ask them both, and then you can interweave them if you want. The first thing I do want to cover before we finish up here is the use of polls in chat rooms and all of that, and how much is a good amount and how much is too much. And then the other thing simultaneously with that is, I know that you talk about in your book that we are on Zoom too much. What is a healthy amount of time to be on Zoom, or, and I say Zoom, but that's virtual meetings of
Yeah.
whatever kind, WebEx, Team, whatever you're using. How much is a healthy and safe amount of time where if it goes over that, it's just too much, whether it's video or audio, or it's just, because I know you talk about like the average is like 6 hours a day, which, I'm, some days I'm above average, and I'm on it a long time. Sometimes I'm less. And this idea of even having room in between to get up and move around and so forth. So kind of talk about that in terms of balance and how do we use this tool. Essentially, the bigger question is how do we use this tool to the most most effectiveness, if you will.
Mhm. My approach is use it infrequently to its maximum effect. So if a meeting, like with every single virtual meeting that I set up, my immediate question is this a person who I can have a phone call with instead? What relationship do I have with this individual or this group of people? And what is it that we're trying to do together? For the majority of my work, the camera needs to be on. I am actively working with people on their communication. I need to be able to see them. But if it's a strategy meeting, that can be phone call. If it is a business chit chat, a get to know you sort of thing, depending on how well I know the person, that can be a phone call very easily. So what can you take into an offline environment? Offline means for me anything where the camera is actually off. That's That's it. It can include phone calls for sure. It's such a tricky question because everyone's tolerances are different. For the most part, people are scheduling themselves beyond what their tolerance actually is. For some people, they might max out at 1 or 2 hours a day before they've simply had it and their communication starts to suffer. Other people can plow through 6 hours, no problem, but they might not be able to do that 5 days a week. So I look at it as cumulatively over a week, how many hours a day are you spending? So if you had to average it out, what I find is that I am very good at doing intensive days where there's a lot of video, and then I need a couple of days where there is minimal to no video and the cameras are off. So that gives me the recovery time. Other people I've worked with, they've found that they can do the 1 or 2 hours in the morning and they need the afternoon or vice versa in order to turn it away, shut it off, and do deeper work and just get away from it. So you have to watch yourself and say, okay, where do I hit my peak? Where do I notice my energy really flagging? What are my tolerances like? And I like to journal this over the course of 2 weeks, even a month, depending on how you work. But give yourself a couple of weeks of journaling your responses to really figure out where you feel best and where you feel drained. And then you can start to portion out your meetings according to that. Yes, you need flexibility, but as much as possible, say, I am a 2 hours in the morning kind of person. Cool. Fit those video conferences as much as you can into those 2 hours in the morning, or stuff them all into the first 2 or 3 days of the week. That's what I like to do. And then have the other days largely off camera. So there's no one answer. It's more just about observing your responses and seeing when you need that recharge time.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, and that's actually that's worked for me as well, is that having some days where I'm just like, this is a no Zoom day. This is a no camera day. I don't have to put makeup on. I don't have to do
Yeah.
my hair. I just can chill. And
That's why I like them all in one day. I don't want to be doing this all the time.
you and me both. You and me both. Absolutely. Well, so the other question was with regards to these polls and use of some of these tools, because I think some of it can be overdone. It's kind of like, to me, I think about it like PowerPoint. PowerPoint is a great support tool. It is often, though, used as a crutch,
Yeah.
and that's where it gets to be too much. So can you speak to what is the healthy balance of using polls, and because that can also create more fatigue for the person who's hosting, but and so if you're the one doing it, or even for your audience to be like, okay, we're jumping around. But if it's too static, then it's, it could be they need something to change it up and change up
Yeah.
their view and so forth.
Yeah, they really do. And that's where you get into the engagement, the whole engagement piece. The number one thing you can do to engage people isn't actually using the tools. It's not the polls, it's not the PowerPoint. It's how well you can mug for the webcam. Are you making the eye contact? Are you using gesture? Do you have a lot of animation in your voice? That's what people initially respond to in terms of, yeah, this is something I want to be part of. Now, speaking directly to the people who are on the call matters a lot. You want them to feel like they're part of the conversation. So if you're having a meeting, this means there should be a lot of sharing of the microphone. If you are there to give them a 10-minute report, maybe that could be a written report. Send them the report, then come to the meeting so that people can talk about it. Don't just be on camera nonstop, but sometimes that's not an option. What I like to do is every few minutes, I like to swat something back to the audience or change up their experience in some way. So in a meeting, that would be saying, okay, Nicole, can you please comment on XYZ? Thanks very much, Nicole. Jamie, do you have anything to follow up with on that? And you verbally cue people to speak. In a longer presentation, polls are a great way of doing that. It does give people that minute of saying, oh, okay, now I can respond. And then it gives you something to react to. So it creates that feeling of two-way conversation. Like I said, good for presentations, also good for those really big company meetings where there's 100 people on the call. It's a meeting, but really only 2 or 3 people will ever do the talking. Use polls to get feedback, to make other people feel like they're part of it. And then with the PowerPoint, oh man, I love PowerPoint. I am a PowerPoint aficionado, but only when the PowerPoint is substantially adding to your message or to the experience of the people watching. We are on video conference, so we can see each other's faces. That's why we are on video conference. So you want to spend more time in talking head mode, which is what we're in right now, and less time in static slide mode than vice versa. Like you said, many people will use it as a crutch. So the PowerPoint becomes a way of hiding from the camera. Don't do that. That's not why we're here. What you want to do is toggle back and forth. If it is a longer talk, then giving people a different image to look at. I usually use it to do visual jokes. Like I'll have a funny story and I'll have the perfect picture to accompany it. And that lets them then engage with what they're seeing in a different way. It breaks up the experience and reinvigorates their attention. But then as soon as the picture is no longer relevant, off it comes and I'm back in talking head mode. So it goes the same way for any kind of meeting. In a meeting, it's more likely that you're going to be doing things like sharing charts or spreadsheets or some kind of information. That is great. Awesome. Get everyone on the same page. Get everyone looking at the same thing instead of telling them, okay, now go to cell B4. No, not that one, Judy, the other one. Don't make them do that. Show them your screen and your graph and send them around your spreadsheet. But once you're done looking at it, once you don't need it anymore, take it off. Bring everyone back so they can see one another.
This is so good, Lauren. And I know for you, this is old hat, like you do this all the time, but this is so helpful for those of us that are learning how to use it. And I've actually used Zoom for a while with my clients because when I moved from Canada down to the US, I ended up having to use Skype and then, which was audio, and then eventually, did the conference call, tried that, and then eventually got to the use of video, which has been amazing. But even so, I'm listening to you and I'm learning tips and how to use, because one of the things that I'm not that great at is using the polls and the this and the that and all those additional accoutrements that come along with it. And especially in the recent years. So really, really helpful. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit today. I would encourage.
There's kind of a magic number.
Yeah.
There is kind of
Yes.
a magic number with the polls and the switch up every 7 minutes.
Okay. Yeah.
That's kind of an old trick from the public speaking world that we try to get people to do something, a state change every 7 minutes. My view is whenever it makes sense. But if you're talking for a long time, then you're going to need to find those specific moments when you say, okay, state change, give them a poll, give them a picture. Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to sneak that in there.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you did. That is gold. So awesome. Well, and for our listeners and viewers, I would encourage you go get a copy of Lauren's book, Unmute. It is fun. It is informative. Yeah, there's a copy if you're watching online, and it is excellent book. This is one of those books, like when I first started reading it, I was like, oh, this is going to be one of those great books. It's not dry whatsoever. And as somebody who was on John Hansen, who was on LinkedIn, commented when I was posting about this event coming up in this conversation, is that he said, Lauren, and so Lauren, your reputation precedes you. He said, Lauren spoke at our conference last year, and she was like amazing. And I forget
Thank you, John.
The comment that he made exactly about it. It was something about like she reaches through the camera and just like, grabs your attention.
That's what we're trying to do. Reach through the camera, talk to the people on the other side of the camera, get in there with them.
That's right. And so if you want to know how to do that, and I know that we've given you a taste here, if you want to know really how Lauren does that, get a copy of her book. You can go on Amazon. You can go, I'm sure, at the local bookstores. Or, of course, you can also go on her website, which is laurensergy.com, and get a copy of her book. So I highly recommend that. Again, Lauren, thank you for being here. And thank you to our listeners and viewers. We appreciate you being here. I want to also remind you that if this is your first time tuning into the Leaders of Transformation podcast, this is episode 407, which means that there is over 400 episodes available on our website at leadersoftransformation.com, where we talk about all things leadership and really transformation, how to create transformation, positive transformation in the world. And so I would encourage you to go check those out. The nice part about it is, because I do like things to be easy to search and so forth, is there is a search field and you can type in the topic that you're interested in. And if we've done an episode on it, it's going to come up. So you don't have to scan through 400 on a list to see which ones you would be interested in. So utilize that. Highly encourage you to do that. And again, thank you for listening. And next week, we're going to have another amazing guest on this show. And we're actually going to be talking about, he's actually a peacemaker. So bringing peace into the workplace and bringing reducing the conflict and creating resolution. And this is his specialty. And so you won't want to miss that. You're going to want to be here for that. So I encourage you that. Thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.